In the previous videos, we talked about the 3 levels of analysis, and then we looked deeper into the individual level. So now we're going to look into analyzing international politics from the state level of analysis. This level analyzes how countries are organized internally and how that has an impact on the foreign policy outcomes. So at this level, we can look at several things. We can look at the type of government and the way that countries are organized internally, because the way that countries are organized matters for international peace. However, there is disagreement over which system, which method is the best one for peace. So this is where we get into the argument between the liberal approach and the socialist approach. So the liberal approach says that countries are peaceful if they are liberal democracies. So in this case, it applies the democratic peace theory. If countries have liberal institutions, democratic systems of government, free trade, free elections, individual freedoms, then they will be more peaceful. And on the other hand, the socialist approach says that countries are most peaceful when they are socialist, saying that country leaders go to war to pursue their own goals for their own class, for the interest of the bourgeoisie, where the working class wants to be peaceful, but the leaders go to war for their own interests on behalf of the whole country. So this view is that if countries were socialist, then they will eliminate the conflict between classes. So this perspective is of course much less common now than it was in the past, especially during the Cold War period. So yes, you can also look into the state ideology. And then we can also look at the country's economic system. Does the country have an open or a closed market economy? And what are the current economic conditions? And how does that have an influence on the country's foreign policy? Another thing that you can look at is the media and public opinion. So you can ask, what is the role of the media and the voices of the people inside the country? And does it have a strong or little influence on foreign policy? Do policy leaders really take people's opinions into account? So this is of course going to be different from country to country. There are 2 main views. One view is that citizens and the media have little influence over foreign policy. That is because people don't fully understand the foreign policy problems. So the government elite has more freedom on influencing their foreign policy. So they are the ones that are making the foreign policy regardless of the people's opinions. And the other view is that public opinion and the media can constrain the government's foreign policy. For example, the news coverage and access to information about world events, that has an impact on what the government can do, especially in democracies where politicians that don't listen to the public can be punished in the next elections. The government also has to make sure that their policies have public support. And for that, they have to listen to what the media is saying, because the media is going to influence people's opinions. But then, you have to look at the other issue, which is that, is the media totally independent? Or is it following the official government sources, the official government line? Or is the media manipulating people by framing the same issue in different ways in order to favor their own perspective? So in this case, you have to look at who runs that particular media outlet and what is their agenda. And another point that you can look at is the bureaucratic structure of the country. So basically how the country is structured. How is the administration of the policy-making groups? And how are the different departments in the country? So are those bureaucracies actually rational? Or are they mostly pursuing their own interests? So you can also look into different bureaucracies competing against each other, or are there political actors bargaining for their own political agendas inside those bureaucracies? And how do all of these things influence foreign policy? From this perspective, we will find more people than just the president or the prime minister or the foreign minister. So we will also find people in the military establishment, and how they might have different perspectives on one issue, or how they might also have their own interests for their own department. Something else that you can look at is that how making decisions in groups affects the foreign policy. So if people make decisions in groups instead of working individually, does that force them to adopt consensus on an issue that otherwise they would have disagreed with, but eventually they agreed with just for the sake of the group? And another thing that you can look at is, for example, at the country's society. How is the country's culture? What are some of the cultural aspects that leaders value so great that it influences their foreign policy? So for some of them, it might be religious values. Others are values like human rights, democracy, freedom of speech. And other countries place a high value on social stability and economic development and environmental issues or security. And then you can look, for example, at political parties. What are their positions? How different are their positions? Are there some politicians that are constrained by acting on party lines? For example, if they are in favor of a certain foreign policy decision, would that affect the chances of being re-elected? Or you can also look at more extremist parties. Do they want more a specific certain policy outcome? Another thing that you can look at are interest groups. Are there groups that are lobbying the government in favor of a particular foreign policy? Or are there groups that favor relations with a particular country, or they are less in favor of other countries? So I think that this level is quite easy to understand. So for this one, basically you have to look at the internal issues in the country and how that affects the country's foreign policy. So at this level, we are not looking at questions of anarchy and the balance of power and the security dilemma and all of those issues. Those issues belong to the system level. However, knowledge of these issues also influence the decisions of politicians too. However, these are problems at the international system level, which we will learn in the next video. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching.